Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a time when the streets of Tokyo were still called Edo, and the brightest lights in the city didn't come from neon signs, but from bobbing lanterns on wooden boats. Picture this. You're standing on the edge of the Sumida River, a warm evening breeze brushing your sleeves. The water laps gently at the sides of a long, narrow boat, painted in muted reds and browns. Paper lanterns sway from bamboo poles above, casting golden halos on the inky black current. You step aboard, and with a soft creak of the planks beneath your feet, your journey into a floating world begins. There's no hum of traffic, just the rustle of silk robes, the clink of sack cups, and the distant pluck of a shamisen string. Someone is laughing softly, maybe tipsy already. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive this in real life. One wrong foot and you're in the river, wearing 15 layers of kimono. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Always fun to see who's floating alongside us. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The river was everything in Edo. Roads were often muddy or crowded with foot traffic, and carriages were a luxury few could afford. But the waterways? They were the arteries of a city constantly in motion, especially the Sumida. In daylight it bustled with lumber barges and fishermen shouting prices, but at night it transformed. Imagine your boat pushing off into this gentle maze of rivers and canals. The lanterns on shore begin to shrink behind you, replaced by others flickering from boats bobbing nearby. They come in all shapes, some small with a single couple inside, some larger and echoing with soft songs. You might spot a nobleman reclining on cushions, head tilted back listening to a blind musician, or maybe a merchant family enjoying grilled fish while a boatman hums a lullaby. These floating tea houses, or ukiyo-bune, weren't just about tea. The word ukiyo hints at something deeper, the floating world, a poetic term that meant both fleeting pleasures and the Buddhist reminder of life's impermanence. A bit dramatic, sure, but that's Edo for you. You run your hand along the edge of the boat. It's lacquered smooth, probably smelling faintly of pine and river algae. Above you, fabric banners flutter. A stylized plum blossom marks the name of the tea house you've chosen tonight. They all have names, some cheeky, some elegant. One famous one was called Moon's Reflection Pavilion, though the locals preferred just calling it that place with a really good soba. Historians still argue whether these floating tea houses evolved naturally from fishing boats or were inspired by courtly entertainment on palace ponds. Either way, by the late 1600s, they were everywhere. Not legally sanctioned, mind you, but tolerated. Technically, there were curfews, but boats don't need to follow roads, do they? You settle into a low cushion. The boat rocks gently with each ripple. From the small grill near the stern, savoury smoke curls up. Eel, most likely, brushed with a sweet soy glaze and sizzling on skewers. Your host, dressed in indigo robes, offers you a bowl of warm sake. You nod. It would be rude not to. Above, the moon is full. That's no accident. Full moon nights were the busiest on the water. Moon viewing parties were a thing. Tsukimi. You'd float quietly under a pale white sky, your sake cup catching moonlight with every sip. In the distance, fireworks might crackle, or a few geisha might perform slow, deliberate dances under flickering lanterns. You lean back, and there's that distinct sound again, the 3 strings of a shamisen played somewhere just out of sight. It's mournful, sure, but somehow comforting too, like a lullaby for grown-ups. The lyrics are probably about lost love or cherry blossoms, but the melody tells you not to worry too much. You're floating, you're safe, just don't drop your fan overboard. A few other boats drift by. One is crowded with what looks like samurai. Rare, but not impossible. Another holds a group of laughing merchants tossing paper fans into the river for some reason. Probably a drinking game, probably not the smartest one. The fans float for a moment, then sink like koi chasing crumbs. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some boatmen, those gruff, strong rowers at the rear, believed in whispering to the river. Tiny chants, barely audible. Not prayers exactly, but old songs passed down like rowing techniques. They said it kept the boat safe, that the river, if pleased, would carry you gently. You can't help but notice the texture of the world around you. Everything is a little soft. The paper lanterns have a glow like warm rice. The wood creaks, but it's a familiar sound. Even the mist on the water, just thin enough to be poetic, rolls across the river like a silk sheet being pulled over the city. And here comes a joke. One Edo-era poet once wrote, "Floating tea houses are like my wife, beautiful from far away, expensive up close, and if you lean too hard, you fall in." As you chuckle softly, your boat pulls into a quiet bend of the river. The sounds of other revelers fade. Somewhere, a night heron calls out. You sip your sack. It's just slightly bitter now, maybe because it's your third cup, or maybe because you're thinking about that poet's wife. So here you are, on a boat, under the stars, on a river that once cradled 1,000 nights like this, some loud, some secret, some just sleepy enough to never be remembered clearly, but tonight, you'll remember this one, for a while at least. The boat rocks gently as your thoughts start drifting backward. Before this river shimmered with lanterns and lovers' whispers, before the tea houses even had a chance to float, there was just mud and frogs and some very, very damp rice. Before Edo was Edo, it was nothing special, just a marshy, underwhelming fishing village with a few huts and a name that roughly meant estuary. You picture it now, low, smoky houses, barefoot kids sloshing through the shallows and fishermen shouting about the size of their catch in the hope anyone would buy. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely didn't smell like grilled eel. But then, like in every good history tale, everything changed because one man had a big idea. In the early 1600s, Tokugawa Ieyasu, a man with a fondness for swords and centralization, decided this sleepy spot by the water would be the perfect place to run an empire. Why? Probably because Kyoto, the old capital, was getting crowded, and possibly because Ieyasu liked a challenge. Or maybe he liked the sound of frogs. Historians still argue whether Ieyasu chose Edo for strategic river access, or simply for its distance from rival clans. Either way, the moment he moved in, the sleepy marsh turned into a buzzing construction site. Picture it. Thousands of labourers hauling stones, redirecting rivers, filling in swamps, all to build a city that could support the bureaucracy and ambition of an emerging shogunate. The frogs? Let's just say they got evicted. You lean back against the cushion, imagining what this river would have looked like back then. No boats, no music, just fog curling over untouched water. In a weird way, that silence must have felt bigger than the city it would become. As Edo grew, it didn't do so politely. It exploded. By the 18th century, it was one of the largest cities in the world, more than 1 million people packed into a space that still had limited bridges. Which brings us back to the river. Without boats, this city wouldn't have functioned. Water was not just scenic, it was survival. The Sumida River became more than a feature, it was the stage. Merchants used it to ship goods. Farmers floated produce down from upstream. Fishermen, of course, did their thing, though by now their catch had serious competition from land-based sellers with better marketing skills. Here's the quirky bit. While the city expanded, its maps didn't always keep up. Some areas on old maps are just labelled deep water, avoid. Others show floating structures in the wrong spot, probably moved by storms or bureaucratic guessing. There's one map that just labels a whole district as possibly tea, possibly not. And then there's you, still adrift, tracing the moonlight on the water. It's hard to imagine this place as anything but calm, but you know better now. Beneath this peaceful glide is a centuries-old struggle between land and ambition, mud and monarchy. Edo had to fight the terrain. The city flooded often, especially during the rainy season, when entire neighbourhoods might wake up with tatami mats bobbing like tofu. Some clever engineers designed levees and canals that doubled as defences and transport routes. Others just shrugged and learned to swim. But perhaps the most poetic transformation was how water turned from problem to pleasure. Eventually, as the city stabilised, people began to see the river as more than a means to an end. It became a destination. You pass a smaller boat with a single passenger sketching by candlelight. Artists in Edo were obsessed with scenes like this. Floating pavilions, water lilies, lovers caught in moonlight. One famous ukiyo-bune artist, Utagawa Hiroshige, made an entire career out of showing the city's quieter side, often with river views. In his prints, you almost always see some tiny boat, bobbing patiently under bridges, waiting for history to pass by. The irony? Hiroshi rarely got in boats himself. Apparently he had motion sickness. So most of those dreamy scenes, total guesswork. But hey, they sold well. And speaking of artful guesses, there's a theory that early floating tea houses were actually inspired by court nobles in Kyoto, who would host parties on boats during cherry blossom season. They'd drift through petals like aristocratic ducks, composing haiku about how nothing in life lasts forever, especially the snacks. You squint into the mist now. Is that another tea house ahead or just a trick of the light? Hard to say. The further you go, the softer everything becomes. Edges blur. Sounds stretch out like old poems. You stretch your legs carefully. One bad move and you're wet. But your host gives you a nod and pours another round of sake. You sip. It's warmer this time. Or maybe you are. Here's one more sleepy joke for the night. An Edo proverb once went, "Even a drunk can steer a boat, but only once." You smile. You hope your boatman isn't testing that theory tonight. Somewhere behind you, the city still hums. But out here, the only things that matter are the rhythm of the current and the occasional splash of a curious fish. You breathe deep. The air smells of river and smoke and a tiny trace of plum blossoms drifting in from the banks. This is how Edo began. Not with a bang, but with a slow, steady paddle. And now you float through its memory, one gentle ripple at a time. The next morning, if you are lucky, or perhaps a little hungover, you might step off the boat onto one of Edo's many wooden piers and stretch under the pale sunlight of another impossibly organised day. The city, even while chaotic in parts, had a plan, a strict one. And at its centre, standing firm among the clatter of sandals and shouts of hawkers, was a grid that kept everything moving in an oddly graceful flow. As you step into the waking world of Edo, your feet crunch across the stone walkways of the merchant quarters, still damp with morning dew. This isn't just a city, this is a diagram brought to life, a social flowchart in wood and paper. Every class has its place, every street has its rules, and even your tea house adventures have to follow someone's idea of structure. Here's your mainstream fact of the day. The Tokugawa shogunate engineered Edo's layout with almost obsessive intent. Samurai lived closest to Edo Castle in large, stately compounds, literally the inner circle. Merchants and artisans were pushed farther out in concentric rings, like onions of increasing noise and decreasing power. It wasn't just architecture, it was social choreography. Of course, nobody likes being choreographed for too long. That's where floating tea houses started to look like loopholes, but we're not there yet. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate how much food organisation went into the daily hum of Edo life. You smell it now, steamed rice from an open stall, miso soup from a corner shop, and, most heavenly of all, a narrow alley where a soba vendor is set up for the breakfast crowd. He waves a fan over his portable stove, sending curls of savoury smoke into the morning air. You drift toward him, dreamlike. Soba, made from buckwheat flour, was quick, cheap, and, most importantly, delicious. It also became Edo's signature noodle because, thanks to frequent fires, it was the kind of thing you could make in a hurry. Entire blocks burned down regularly. Firefighters in Edo were half saviours, half stuntmen, and the average building was more flammable than a scroll soaked in oil. You had to be quick, and so did your breakfast. Now here's your quirky historical tidbit. Many Edo firefighters doubled as kabuki performers during festivals. They wore dramatic coats, shouted slogans, and did acrobatic stunts to rally the crowd before charging headfirst into flames. Firefighting and flair? Very Edo. You sip from a steaming bowl of broth. From somewhere nearby, a gong clangs softly. Not a warning, just the start of a merchant's workday. Around you, children chase dogs, women hang laundry, and the first customers of the day argue over the price of pickles, all of it timed like clockwork. Yet this order came at a cost. The shogunate imposed laws so strict, they dictated not only what clothes you could wear, but what furniture you could own. Your roof tile said more about your status than your bank account. Samurai couldn't wear flashy colours, merchants couldn't ride horses, and if you were caught flaunting wealth outside your class, let's just say you wouldn't be going back to the floating tea house anytime soon. Still, Edwitz found clever ways to bend the rules. You'd see elaborate kimono linings, plain on the outside but swirling gold and crimson on the inside, secret embroidery, hidden flair. Because even under all that structure, people wanted to float a little, and float they did, quite literally. Floating tea houses were the perfect dodge. On land, a curfew said you had to go home by dusk. On a boat? Well, who's to say where home ends and entertainment begins? The river wasn't governed quite the same way. It shifted. It moved. It didn't lend itself to easy borders. Historians still argue whether this legal blind spot was accidental or quietly tolerated by the authorities. Some say it was the city's way of letting off steam, an unofficial safety valve. Others claim bribes were exchanged, hands were shaken, and as long as things didn't get too wild, the shogunate looked the other way. You wouldn't be surprised. The entire city hums with this kind of quiet negotiation. Strict rules on the surface, creative wiggle room underneath. You wander past a carp pond framed by bonsai trees and watch a group of elderly men playing Go beneath a red parasol. One of them glances up and grins. Maybe he was once a boatman, or maybe he just likes the way you walk like someone who's slept on a gently rocking floor. You're not in the tea house now, but its world still lingers in your senses. You can almost hear the shamisen again. It follows you. A soft breeze pushes a few sakura petals across the path, out of season, but this is a dream, so we'll allow it. You walk toward a narrow bridge, where kids are tossing stones into the canal. Each splash echoes off the wooden beams above, and you pause, looking down into the rippling water. Beneath you, the water carries memories of laughter, of steam rising from tea, of secret rendezvous just out of sight. The city above may be rigid, but below, where the boat slips silently through the alleys, the rules bend like willow branches. And so you drift back toward the edge of the river, where a few boats are beginning to prepare for the evening. You spot one with a new paint, its red lacquer gleaming in the sunlight. A fresh lantern hangs at its bow, not yet lit but already promising escape. You step back onto the dock, your footfall quiet on the worn boards. Another night is coming. Another chance to slip past the curfews, sip warm sake, and float through a city where even the most rigid rules can't quite reach you. Because in Edo, everything has its place. But the best things, they're found just off the map. You find yourself back by the riverside, toes curling against the edge of a weathered dock. The light is soft now, mid-afternoon perhaps, casting long shadows on the water. Ahead of you, moored casually to a leaning post, is one of Edo's earliest experiments in river escape. A wooden platform barely larger than a tatami mat, with a canvas canopy and a tiny charcoal grill puffing out gentle smoke. No sign, no fanfare, no red lacquer railing yet. But this humble raft is where the floating tea house began. Before they were drifting salons of song and sake, they were simple extensions of the land. You can imagine it easily. Land-based tea houses pressed up against the riverside, constantly at odds with limited space and rising demand. So some clever soul thought, why not move it out just a bit? A borrowed boat here, a plank added there, and soon the entertainment industry found buoyancy. The earliest ukiyo-bune weren't built for show. They were extensions of landlocked pleasure houses or food stalls, constructed to dodge taxes or curfews, often both. You'd step down from the street and climb onto a floating extension tethered by hemp rope, creaking with every movement. Technically not on land, technically not in violation. Technically. Historians still debate whether these proto-tea houses were modelled on earlier temple boats used for religious festivals, or if they borrowed the idea from canal vendors in southern China. What we do know, Edweets adored them. They were cheap to build, cheaper to operate, and far more flexible than anything on dry ground. Floating structures didn't require land leases, and since the shogunate's zoning rules didn't quite apply to water, there was a lot of convenient ambiguity. What started as a side hustle for riverside stalls quickly evolved into full-service establishments afloat. As the city's population surged, so did the variety of these riverboats. Some were simple rowboats with a kettle and 2 stools. Others were ornate, long-decked vessels outfitted with cushions, curtains, and a full cast of staff. Boatwrights began specialising in them. Demand grew, and so did the tea houses, literally. Some grew so large they had to be pushed into deeper waters to avoid capsizing from too many sack-loving guests. You board one now in your mind, watching the boatman adjust his straw hat, a rope of prayer beads swinging from his wrist. He nods once, pushes off the dock with a long pole, and just like that, you've slipped away from the city again. There's a light clatter behind you. Someone's preparing pickles. The tiny kitchen tucked in the back of the boat is just wide enough for a single cook to stir a pot, grill skewers, and wash bowls. The scent of soy and ginger curls into the air. You're no longer tethered, in every sense of the word. As the boat glides, you pass others, small floating stages where kabuki actors perform to intimate drifting audiences. A woman in a crimson kimono sings softly from one boat, her voice catching on the breeze like silk on branches. Two men sit on a raft playing shogi, their game pieces bumping with each ripple of the current. A child leans over the edge of another boat, trailing their fingers through the water with quiet joy. The river becomes a floating arcade. Not loud, not chaotic, just humming, like a festival suspended on water. And because this is Edo, there are rules. Of course there are. Even floating fun needed boundaries. By the early 1700s, the shogunate began issuing guidelines, some vague, some oddly specific. No loud singing after dark, no music that offended public order, which is very subjective when shamisen are involved, and definitely no unlicensed drinking. Naturally, these were followed with all the sincerity of a cat promising not to knock over a vase. Tea house owners became masters of disguise. Some built compartments to hide forbidden bottles during inspections. Others claimed their establishments were poetry appreciation barges, which, to be fair, sometimes they were. Drunken poetry was practically a genre. One floating establishment even posted a sign reading, "No revelry permitted, quiet tea only," followed by a winking face painted beneath it. Edo sarcasm at its finest. And here's your quirky tidbit. One particularly bold tea house had a ceiling painted like a clear blue sky, complete with clouds and birds, so that even during grey weather, patrons could pretend they were floating under a perfect afternoon. It reportedly made some guests dizzy, but business was booming. You lean back now, letting your body sway with the motion of the boat. The river sings in a quiet murmur beneath you, and the shadows of overhead bridges cross your face in slow motion. Everything feels just a little unreal, half play, half poem. You spot a group of carp swimming beside the boat, their mouths bobbing near the surface. The cook tosses them a leftover ice ball and they scatter like coins dropped into a fountain. The boatman smiles but says nothing. He knows the rhythm. Push, drift, anchor, repeat. These boats aren't built for speed. They're built for lingering, for escaping the ticking clocks of land life. You wonder how many others came out here, hoping to pause time just for a night. As dusk begins its slow descent, you hear a flute echo from somewhere upstream, soft, melancholy. Probably someone practicing for a festival performance, or maybe just playing for themselves. The sound rides the water like breath over glass. There's a final joke before the sun sets. One Edo wit once said that floating tea houses were the best kind of relationship. No doors, no locks, and they drift away when things get too serious. You smile at that. The boat turns slightly, taking you into a narrower canal. Willow branches dip low, brushing the roof with a whisper. The city feels far away again. Just you, the water, and the delicious, dangerous promise of something not quite legal, but very well loved, and all from a plank, a pot, and a little push off the shore. It's evening now. The sky wears that specific shade of Edo twilight, pale lavender bleeding into ink, and the river reflects it like a giant sheet of painted silk. You're seated low in your boat, warmed by a cup of sake, when the conversation drifts to something everyone on the water knows but no one quite admits. Rules don't always sync when boats float, especially not in Tokugawa, Japan. Edo's curfew bell had already rung an hour ago. Officially, everyone should be indoors, shutters latched, fires snuffed. But out here, boats slip past the edges of legality with a grace that makes you admire their balance, both nautical and bureaucratic. Your boatman laughs quietly when you ask about it. He gestures toward the shadowy outlines of other boats on the water, some drifting slowly, some anchored just far enough from shore to blur jurisdiction. Floating tea houses had a certain genius. They weren't on land, so land-based laws had to stretch awkwardly to cover them, and stretch they did. The Tokugawa government had a love-hate relationship with pleasure. They feared the moral decay of too much indulgence, but also understood that controlled pleasure was a useful pressure release. So, they did what any well-meaning authoritarian regime might do: made things complicated. Technically, music after dark was forbidden, unless it was part of a licensed celebration. Technically, women weren't allowed to perform aboard vessels without special permits. Technically, Sake could not be sold without heavy taxation. And yet, every boat you pass tells a different story. One has a trio of musicians swaying in rhythm, barely visible behind paper blinds. Another hosts an unusually chatty group of gentlemen who've clearly had more than a few cups. And a third, let's just say it has a suspicious number of decorative fans and laughter that bubbles too regularly to be tea-related. Historians still argue whether the floating tea houses flourished because of weak enforcement or intentionally lax oversight. Some believe high-ranking officials secretly enjoyed these river escapes themselves and kept their patrol boats conveniently undersupplied with lanterns. A common local joke was that the river police rowed with one oar and one blind eye, which, to be fair, is probably not the most efficient method of law enforcement, but you get the idea. Your own boat rounds a bend now, pulling you into quieter water where the current slows and reflections sharpen. You can make out the glow of candles inside a larger ukiyo-bune anchored nearby. Inside, a host in a rust-coloured robe kneels beside a simmering pot, slicing yuba delicately into bowls. His guests laugh in that slow, warm way people do when they know there's nowhere else they need to be. You start to see how the floating tea houses became more than just an escape. They became a loophole lifestyle. On land, you followed the script. On the water, you rewrote it. Here, a samurai could share drinks with a merchant. Here, you could speak freely, sing softly, and maybe even fall a little bit in love without the pressure of tomorrow's rules. Here's your quirky tidbit. One notorious floating tea house was built in such a way that the deck could split in two. If officials approached, the host would simply untie the centre, drifting his guests apart into two innocent-looking fishing barges. "It's just a misunderstanding," they'd say with blank faces and baskets of fake bait. There were also code words. "Would you care for the plum tea?" could mean anything from "the geisha's about to perform" to "hide the sake." The exact meanings varied from boat to boat. Part of the fun was figuring them out or pretending you had. You pass under a low footbridge now. Two lovers linger above, their shadows stretched long and theatrical against the stone. They don't notice you. Or if they do, they don't care. Everyone in Edo seemed to understand the unspoken agreement of the floating world. If it's on the water, it's none of your business. And yet, not everything floated freely. There were moments when the government did crack down. Surprise inspections, quiet raids. One year, an entire fleet of ukiyo-bune was impounded for violating morality codes, although records later revealed that most of them were released quietly once the excitement faded. It was always a dance. Step forward, bow low, step back. You glance down at the small painted box beside your cushion. Inside is a deck of karuta cards, used for poetry games. Not gambling, not exactly, but you suspect more than a few fortunes were made and lost with them under the flickering glow of lanterns. You try your hand at one card, a poem about waves, memory, and someone waiting by a shoreline that no longer exists. It hits a little hard, actually. As you drift again, your host lights another lantern. The flame catches slowly, illuminating the small gilded crest painted on the roof beam. A chrysanthemum maybe, or a stylized koi. These boats often had their own family symbols, even if they were technically illegal businesses. They were proud of their craft and their tricks. Because really, what is a floating tea house if not a trick? A beautiful, swaying bamboo and paper sleight of hand. It promised nothing permanent. It defied borders, regulations, and sometimes common sense. But in return, it offered a pocket of peace, a little mystery, a taste of something sweet and smoky and fleeting. And here's your final sleepy joke of the night. A boat without a roof is a fishing trip. A boat with music is a felony. You laugh softly. The river laps against the hull. A few drops of water splash in through the side slats, cold against your ankle. You don't mind. After all, this isn't a place for worrying. This is a place for watching shadows play on water and hearing the faint echo of a shamisen song in the distance, just as the stars begin to prick the sky like silver needles. The rules are still there somewhere, but for now, they're drifting too. The Norin curtain lifts with a rustle as you duck your head and step aboard another boat, one slightly larger this time, less a raft and more a room that just happens to float. The air is warm and rich with the scent of grilled soy-glazed eel, tatami mats underfoot just soft enough to trick your feet into relaxing. You glance around and realize something quietly wonderful. This boat has everything you'd find in a landlocked tea house, only rearranged to bob gently with the current. You're in a floating chaya, and it's perfect. The interior is compact but thoughtful. Bamboo beams arch overhead, strung with seasonal decorations, paper cranes in spring, red maple leaves in autumn, tiny dangling gourds in late summer. The tatami is new and fragrant, still giving off that green, almost sweet smell. At the far end, behind a gauzy paper screen, a shamisen player begins to tune. The soft, three-string twang sets a tone more dream than song. What's inside a floating tea house? Well, aside from you and your expertly poured cup of sake, there's a curated set of comforts designed to turn 2 hours on a river into a memory worth writing poems about. You have low tables lacquered in warm black, cushions embroidered with delicate pine needle patterns, incense quietly threading the air, and always, always, a perfectly arranged centerpiece. Tonight it's a small vase with a single camellia, wilting just slightly, because, impermanence is beautiful and all that. Mainstream fact time, floating tea houses were small-scale marvels of design. Many were built to accommodate 6 to 10 guests comfortably, though some could host twice as many with strategic cushion placement. They often included a tiny kitchen, a hidden cupboard for valuables, and retractable wall panels to adjust ventilation and lighting. Some even had detachable blinds to maintain privacy when rival boats drifted a little too close. But comfort wasn't everything. These boats also had rhythm. Guests were greeted with practiced phrases, tea was served with ritualized flourishes, and even the smoke from the charcoal brazier curled upward with intentional grace. It was performance, it was hosting, it was hospitality on a stage that never touched land. You take another sip, and as the warmth settles in your chest, the door behind you slides open. 2 women step in, robes swishing quietly. One carries a tray with seasonal sweets, bean paste shaped like chrysanthemums, and the other bows gently before settling behind the shamisen. They don't introduce themselves, not yet. This is part of the magic. Let the moment arrive slowly. Let it unfold like rice paper in the rain. You notice small details. The lacquerware bowls with faint golden vines painted inside, only visible once you're finished eating. The chopsticks wrapped in washi paper with a haiku printed in tiny ink strokes. The tiny wind chime hanging near the window that dings just once as the boat rocks. Quirky tidbit. Some floating tea houses installed subtle mechanisms under the floorboards that caused them to rock slightly more than usual. The extra motion was supposed to create a dreamy atmosphere, or possibly disorient guests just enough to keep them from drinking too much too fast. Whether that was effective or just a rumour spread by clever hosts remains up for debate. But not everything on board was meant to lull. Floating tea houses were stages for subtle games of wit and performance. One guest might challenge the shamisen player to improvise a tune based on the sound of oars in the distance. Another might recite a tanka poem and wait for someone else to match its rhythm and theme before the lanterns dimmed. You reach for a sweet, and as the bean paste melts across your tongue, the shamisen player begins. Not a full song yet, just a series of rising notes, like steps on a distant path. Her eyes stay half lowered, focused, and yet the sound seems to wrap around everyone in the cabin. No one speaks. The river listens too. This is when time folds. You could be in 1701 or 1759 or just last week, because in this boat everything slows and everything repeats. The same gestures, the same music, the same pleasure of sipping warm tea while shadows flicker across a painted screen. Historians still argue whether these performances were closer to theatre or private entertainment. Were these tea houses cultural salons or just cleverly camouflaged businesses? The truth, like the river beneath you, changes depending on the angle of the moon. And there's the moon now, high, full, glowing slightly orange as it rises above the rooftops. One of your hosts lights another lantern, shielding it with her sleeve so the wind doesn't catch the flame. It flickers, then steadies, casting soft rings of light that dance across the water through the open side of the boat. In this moment you feel perfectly suspended, not just between shorelines, but between states, wakefulness and sleep, history and dream, etiquette and laughter. You stretch your legs a little and catch your host's eye. She smiles, refills your cup and nods toward the open river ahead. And just for fun, here's tonight's joke. One Edo poet wrote, "A tea house is like a woman's heart, hard to read, full of surprises, and floats better with sake." You laugh under your breath. The musician has shifted to a new tune now, something cheerful, faster. Your host claps along softly, encouraging you to follow. You do? Why not? You're already floating. The boat gently pivots as your boatman adjusts course. A distant firework explodes. Just a soft pop, not part of any festival, maybe just someone celebrating something. Another boat passes. You glimpse laughter and silhouettes, someone fanning themselves dramatically, someone else sleeping with their head on folded arms, and then they're gone. Just another shadow on the water. You lean your head back and exhale. This cabin, this cup, this song, they're all impermanent. But for now, they're yours. The boat rocks just slightly as the music fades, and the scent of roasted rice tea mingles with the dusky breeze. It's easy to imagine that all this, the shamisen final notes, the glow of paper lanterns, the scent of grilled fish, is created by magic. But behind every swaying boat is a cast of professionals making the floating world possible. You're not alone out here after all. Someone has to row, someone has to cook, someone has to make sure that the sack arrives warm and the guests arrive smiling. The floating tea house isn't just a place, it's a production. Meet the boatmen. Broad-shouldered, sun-wrinkled, and often more philosophical than they let on. Boatmen were the backbone of Edo's river nightlife. You spot yours now, perched at the stern, long oar in hand, rhythmically shifting weight from foot to foot. He doesn't speak unless spoken to, but if you ask him how long he's been doing this, you might unlock a monologue about tides, destiny, and the proper number of sardines in a morning meal. They know every eddy and undercurrent. They know which stretch of the river hides submerged pilings and which back channel is perfect for a quick escape if the night turns complicated. They also know who's likely to tip well, who's travelling with someone they shouldn't be, and which inspector's cousin likes plum wine a bit too much. Boatmen weren't servants, they were navigators, observers, and sometimes quiet enforcers of floating etiquette. Disrespect the boatman, and you might find your journey getting suspiciously bumpy or wet. Then there are the brokers, the matchmakers of the river. You don't always see them, but they're there. They set the appointments, pair the guests, secure the entertainers, and smooth out the many tiny logistical wrinkles that could snag a night meant for drifting. Want a musician? A poetry reader? A last-minute late-night eel delivery? The broker knows someone. Always. Historians still debate the exact scope of the broker's power. Some think they acted as informal guild leaders, coordinating between boat owners and law enforcement. Others believe they were simply well-connected gossip hubs with fans and sharp smiles. Either way, they kept things moving smoothly and quietly. And then there are the entertainers. The geisha, of course, but also less celebrated players. The wandering minstrels with cracked shamisen cases. The comic storytellers who exaggerated their tales until even the boat creaked with laughter. The dancers whose sleeves flowed like mist when the boat turned just right. Floating tea houses were stages, and the performers knew how to use every inch of limited space. Here's your quirky tidbit. There was a brief trend during the mid-1700s for performers to stage mock plays about samurai who accidentally ended up at floating tea houses, trying to hide their identity while falling in love with a courtesan or misplacing their sword. These were wildly popular and often included exaggerated costumes and props, like fans shaped like rice balls or oversized sake bottles. Sometimes the audience was in on the joke. Other times the audience was the joke. You notice now that your boat has pulled up alongside a larger vessel, this one more ornate, with decorative banners fluttering at the corners. A small platform has been attached for performers to stand on, half floating, half tethered. A storyteller is mid-tale, his voice rising and falling like the current, arms gesturing wildly as he describes a night when the Sumida River froze and boats had to be rowed through ice by men with kettles of boiling water. Probably not true, but who cares? You and your fellow listeners laugh, and the boat creaks as a few of you shift to leaning closer. The storyteller makes eye contact with you for just a second, his expression gleefully exaggerated. Then, with a dramatic sigh, he flings his fan open and bows. Applause! Soft, polite, and perfectly timed. Your host bows back, passing you a plate of grilled river trout, fresh, crisp-skinned, served with yuzu and daikon. It's exactly what you didn't know you were craving. The boat rocks slightly again, and you imagine the crew below deck adjusting something. Even here, even now, the experience is being tailored for you in real time. Historians still argue whether these floating tea houses operated as formal businesses or informal collectives. Many of the boat owners, brokers and entertainers formed lasting partnerships, some lasting decades. There are records of families passing down the management of particular boats, complete with recipes, clientele logs and incident journals, in case things got out of hand. Some even had company crests painted discreetly inside, where only regulars would know to look. And speaking of things getting out of hand, here's a joke from the period. Never trust a boat with too much music or too little fish. Both will leave you hungry in the morning. You grin and glance toward the boatman, who definitely heard that but pretends he didn't. He shifts the boat just slightly so that the view lines up perfectly with a line of lanterns strung between dock posts ahead. Intentional? Probably. These guys are artists too. As the night deepens, you notice the roles shifting again. The entertainer bows and disappears behind a sliding panel. A new performer, this one a quiet flutist, takes their place. Your host dims the lantern nearest you, and someone sets down a tray of sesame sweets, carefully spaced like stepping stones across a black dish. The floating tea house may seem like a simple indulgence, but the choreography behind every sound, scent and moment is precise. It's a living organism of cooperation. Rowers, chefs, musicians, servers, storytellers, all rowing the same boat, even if only metaphorically. And now, as your eyes grow heavy, the edges of the boat blur once more. The cast continues their dance, unseen but ever present. You lie back slightly, and with the water lapping gently below, you begin to wonder, how many people work to make this one evening so seamless? Probably more than you'll ever know. You awake, not fully, just that half-lidded drift between sleep and awareness, and realise your boat hasn't moved in a while. It's anchored now, near the edge of the river, where reeds sway lazily, and the air smells like wood smoke and night-blooming flowers. From somewhere nearby comes the faint sound of laughter, a musical tinkle layered with sake and secrets. It's another floating tea house, a lively one, but this one feels different. You peek through the thin paper screen and spot it, a larger boat, decked in silk banners and lit brighter than usual, with women in striking robes lounging on cushions and boatmen in uniform jackets rowing with polished grace. A fancier crowd, louder, more performative, and on the river, there's only one group who ever went that extra mile to compete for attention, the Yoshiwara pleasure quarters. Yes, even on water, the competition floated. Yoshiwara was the official red light district of Edo, a walled city within a city, built to contain pleasure, desire, and distraction in one highly regulated zone. It had its own customs, fashion, economy, even dialects. The courtesans there were artists, celebrities, and often dangerously well-educated. But the Yoshiwara was landlocked, and the floating tea houses, well, they could offer a different kind of freedom. You see, the floating world, ukiyo, was never just about geisha and silk screens. It was about transience, about sipping the present before it evaporated. And while Yoshiwara had prestige, rules, and velvet ropes, the floating tea houses had improvisation, proximity to nature, and, let's be honest, a lot fewer chaperones. That's not to say there wasn't overlap. In fact, here comes your mainstream fact. During peak cherry blossom season, some Yoshiwara courtesans were allowed to leave the district briefly to entertain on boats. These evenings were legendary. Guests competed for time, poets penned verses on the spot, and entire rivers turned into floating pageants of beauty, wit, and passive-aggressive fan-fluttering. But for most of the year, the floating tea houses operated in a more relaxed orbit. They didn't have gilded gates or processions. They didn't need official passes to cross thresholds. Instead, they had a bamboo gangplank, a paper lantern, and a boatman who asked no questions. And that, as you can imagine, caused some friction. Historians still debate how intense the rivalry between Yoshiwara and the river establishments truly was. Some say the floating tea houses were seen as second tier, more casual, less refined. Others argue that they offered something Yoshiwara couldn't. Privacy, anonymity, the kind of night that didn't require a surname or a formal introduction. You look again at the rival boat across the water. A group of musicians is performing a well-rehearsed routine. Their fans open in perfect sync, sleeves flutter like stage curtains. You nod in appreciation. That's some real effort. But then you turn back to your own boat, where the shamisen player starts a simple, almost sloppy tune, soft, sweet, and clearly improvised. You smile. It's not perfect, but it feels closer, like a secret whispered in rhythm. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some floating tea houses had a tradition of silent songs, where a geisha would mime the lyrics of a well-known ballad while the musician played only the chorus. Guests had to guess the song. Those who got it wrong had to perform a forfeited dare, usually something mildly embarrassing, like imitating a carp or drinking from the wrong end of a cup. As you lean back, the lines between these two worlds, Yoshiwara's prestige and the tea house's spontaneity, start to blur, and that's the trick, isn't it? Everyone wanted a bit of both. Elegance without the rules, playfulness without the cheapness. The floating tea houses offered that in delicate doses. A performer might not be as famous as a Yoshiwara Oiran, but she might sing a song that made you cry before the first verse ended. A host might not own a silk-screened folding fan, but he could pair sack with grilled pickles in a way that made you feel briefly, deeply, immortal, and for many Edwards that was enough. Still, the two worlds circled each other like rival moons. When a floating tea house got too popular, whispers would float upriver. They're getting ideas, someone would say. Trying too hard, another would mutter. But even in rivalry there was admiration. Many performers started in one world and drifted to the other. Some returned, some didn't. Some boats even hired retired Yoshiwara musicians to train their younger performers, though always discreetly, of course. Reputation matters, even when floating. You notice now that the lanterns across the water have dimmed. Maybe they're between performances. Or maybe someone spilled sake on the lighting cord. You'll never know. Back in your own boat, things are simpler. Your host offers you a second round of rice crackers, this time dusted with seaweed and pepper. A breeze stirs the curtain, and you catch a glimpse of stars. Bright, sharp, and suddenly very close. The water below reflects them, turning your boat into a constellation drifting through the dark. And tonight's joke? A tired performer once said, "I used to work in Yoshiwara, but the river pays better, and I can throw guests overboard if they're rude." You chuckle. Seems fair. As the night deepens and the music quiets again, you realize something important. It's not about being better or more polished. It's about being present. Floating, drifting, existing just long enough to leave a smile before the mist swallows everything whole. Your boat rocks gently, and you close your eyes. Across the water, another lantern flickers out. The night settles deep now, one of those hushed, velvety hours when even the river seems to exhale slower. The floating tea houses dim their lanterns a little, not off, but softer, like eyelids growing heavy. Somewhere down the canal, a flute plays one last lingering phrase, and then disappears into the night air. It's quiet, but not empty. You lift the edge of the bamboo shade and peek outside, and there it is. The river dotted with dozens, maybe hundreds of tiny flickering lights. Not from tea houses this time, but from lanterns, small, round, floating gently downstream like glowing jellyfish. You watch them glide past, slow and ceremonial. There's no rush. Tonight must be Toranagashi, the lantern floating festival. People send candles down the river to honor lost loved ones, to light their way. It's beautiful, and also a little bittersweet. A floating memorial made of paper, fire, and silence. You sit back down. Your host doesn't speak. Instead, they pass you a cup of genmaicha, toasty, warm, with a hint of popped rice. You sip slowly, eyes fixed on the glowing procession outside. The river is more than a road tonight. It's a poem. Edo's love affair with river festivals ran deep. Nearly every month had one. Spring brought hanami-bune, flower-viewing boats, where passengers would drift under cherry blossoms, sack in hand, as pink petals rained down like confetti. Summer offered kawasobi, river play, with families lounging on rafts as entertainers performed slapstick routines. Autumn meant moon-viewing cruises, where nobles tried to outdo each other's haiku while pretending not to be cold. But summer? Summer was the season of fireflies and fireworks. Your boatman suddenly rows you toward a bend in the river, and there it is. A thunderous bloom of gold explodes in the sky, followed by a spray of red and blue sparks that light up the faces of everyone aboard nearby boats. You gasp, not because it's loud, but because you weren't expecting beauty to be quite that loud. Edo's fireworks displays were famous. The Sumida River Fireworks Festival, first held in the 1730s, was originally organised not as entertainment, but as a memorial during a terrible famine. It was meant to honour the dead and ward off bad luck. but it quickly became a citywide tradition, where mourning met joy and grief found itself paired with grilled squid on a stick. Historians still argue whether the festival was truly started by the shogunate or by a guild of pyrotechnicians hoping to drum up business. Either way, it worked. You pass a boat where someone is waving a fan with sparklers attached. Not safe, not smart, entirely on brand for Edo. Another quirky tradition. Some floating tea houses would hand out firework menus in the summer. No food listed, just metaphors. A golden chrysanthemum might refer to a certain firework style, or a particular guest who had a laugh like one. The guests would order both. It was part performance, part poetry, and part party trick. Your boat continues drifting, the show above reflecting off the surface of the water like twin heavens. Children's laughter echoes from nearby docks. Someone shouts, "Tamaya!" An old-fashioned cheer for the firework makers. The boat rocks gently with the rhythm of it all, and for a moment the whole river feels like it's breathing. The fireworks end as suddenly as they began, leaving the night darker than before, but richer too. Like someone turned the volume down and now every creak of the boat, every ripple against wood feels amplified. You lean on the railing now, close enough to dip your fingers into the water. Cool, silky, a little sticky with summer. Across from you, another lantern floats by, its light dimming as the wick burns low. Someone's memory, carried gently toward the bay. A gust of wind carries the scent of roasted sweet potatoes from a vendor's boat anchored upriver. You almost call out, but your host silently hands you a tiny parcel. A still warm yaki imo wrapped in rice paper. How did they know? You take a bite. It's sweet and soft and earthy. Comfort disguised as a root vegetable. And because Edo always adds a wink, here's your sleepy joke for tonight. Fireworks and first dates have one thing in common. Lots of noise, fleeting beauty, and someone always drops their fan in the river. You grin. Your own fan is still beside you, damp at the edge but intact. You're doing better than most. The music has stopped. The performers have gone to rest. Even the boatman now rows in slower meditative strokes. The lanterns around the rim of your vessel sway, with a rhythm that isn't quite asleep but close. This is the moment when everyone forgets what time it is, or what day. All that matters is that the water still moves, the stars still flicker, and you are wonderfully still floating. Just beyond the bend, a willow tree dips its branches into the canal. The leaves trail like fingers, brushing against your boat as you glide past. Somewhere nearby, a night heron cries. A lonely sound, but not unwelcome. And just like that, another lantern winks out. The river's hushed now, a velvet ribbon under starlight, stitched with the occasional ripple from a passing oar. You rest your chin on your hand, eyes tracing the reflection of the sky, and begin to notice the passengers more than the scenery. Not the performers, not the boatmen, but the women. They've been here all along, of course, draped in soft cotton yukata, laughing into sleeves, pouring tea with practiced grace. But tonight, they seem to drift into sharper focus. Some are guests like you, daughters of merchants perhaps, enjoying a night out with family. Wives of officials gossiping in hushed voices, careful not to tip their wine cups. Others, they're professionals, musicians, servers, storytellers, dancers. Not courtesans, not quite geisha, just skilled women who know how to turn a small boat into a world. Edo was not an easy place for women. The rules were stiff, the roles prescribed. But on the water, there was breathing room, quite literally. Floating tea houses allowed for a surprising degree of social mixing. Here, class lines blurred. A wealthy merchant's daughter could end up laughing alongside a shrine maiden's cousin, and nobody on the boat would bat an eye. Mainstream fact. While geisha were more closely associated with Kyoto and later Tokyo, Edo had its own brand of river-based entertainers. Some were trained, some self-taught, some apprenticed under musicians or tea mistresses who had never set foot in Yoshiwara. On these boats, formality softened into something more relaxed, less about rigid rituals, more about presence, wit, and timing. But it wasn't always so breezy. Historians still debate how welcome women truly were in all floating tea houses. Some records suggest that early ukiyo-bune were male-dominated spaces, more bachelor hideaways than cultural salons. Over time, that changed, but not without resistance. Conservative officials occasionally cracked down on inappropriate mingling aboard boats, especially if women of unclear status were involved. Of course, nothing gets people more curious than a band activity, and so the tea houses adapted. Some created private rooms with sliding panels. Others scheduled performances by women only on seasonal nights, when higher-ups were conveniently distracted by festivals. There was even a rumour about a boat disguised as a rice delivery barge that hosted all-female poetry circles by candlelight. Technically not a tea house, but close enough to raise eyebrows. Your host, a middle-aged woman with laugh lines and beautifully folded sleeves, pours you another cup of tea. She's not performing, she's just managing, watching, making sure everything feels smooth, and she does it well. You wonder how long she's been doing this. Decades, probably. She probably knows every poem ever written about moonlight, probably heard every drunken marriage proposal ever uttered by a man holding a fan upside down. She doesn't need to wear brocade or sing. Her presence alone holds the boat steady. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some floating tea houses trained young girls in the art of wind listening, literally being able to tell approaching boats by the way the air shifted across the water. It sounds mystical, but it was practical. Knowing who was coming gave hosts time to prepare, change the music, hide the sei or rehearse the "we are merely fishing" routine. You watch one of the younger women on the boat now, maybe 18, maybe younger, tiptoeing toward the open side of the vessel to peer through the reeds. She giggles at something only she can see and quickly returns to pour more tea. Whether she's an apprentice or just helping for the season, she moves like she belongs. It's this quiet choreography, the way women on these boats slip between roles, between worlds, that makes the floating tea house so memorable. They aren't background players, they're the rhythm, the softness that sharpens the atmosphere, the quiet force behind the flicker of every lantern, and of course, they remember everything. One Edo saying goes, "The boat forgets, but the women remember." Meaning? What happens on the river might seem ephemeral, but someone always holds the story. Maybe not in writing, but definitely in glance, in gesture, in silence. You glance again toward the willow trees, where another boat has pulled in quietly. A woman in sky-blue robes sits at the bow, alone, plucking a string instrument so softly you're not sure if you hear it or imagine it. Her face is unreadable. Maybe she's waiting for someone, or maybe she's already said goodbye. Tonight's joke is more of a proverb. A clever woman steers the conversation like a boat, light on the oar, heavy on direction. You chuckle into your sleeve, careful not to spill your tea. It's getting colder now, both the tea and the air, but the boat stays warm thanks to a brazier in the corner and the quiet presence of the crew. The hostess returns and offers you a second cushion. You bow in thanks. A lantern flickers as she adjusts it. Its light catches in the curve of her cheekbone, and for a moment you see every year she's ever spent out here on this river. Summer nights, monsoon seasons, autumn parties, and quiet winter charters. All of it, etched into the corners of her eyes. You sip your tea, you listen, you float. And for now the river holds you, carried by oars, by starlight, and by the women who've always been here, keeping the water gentle. The river breathes in flavours now. You can feel it before you smell it. The subtle pull of heat drifting over the water, wrapping your boat in the warm, savoury aroma of something grilling just out of sight. Someone's cooking nearby, and your stomach, previously distracted by poetry and floating lanterns, starts to pay attention again. Floating tea houses weren't just havens for performance and escape. They were, in every sense, kitchens on water. And not just any kitchens, creative, adaptive, oddly competitive ones. Because nothing says Edo ambition like a boat that can outcook a land-based inn. The boat you're on tonight has a small hearth tucked into its rear chamber. It's simple, just a brazier, a few clay pots, and a lattice of chopsticks holding slices of tofu to roast. But the scent tells you someone in this boat knows what they're doing. Mainstream fact, river cuisine in Edo was seasonal, flexible, and surprisingly experimental. Floating tea houses served everything from freshwater eel, unagi, to lotus root tempura, pickled river greens, grilled carp, steamed clams, and miso soups brewed with locally foraged herbs. The menus changed not by chef's mood, but by tidal patterns and migration cycles. If a certain fish wasn't biting, the dish disappeared. No substitutions, no questions. You reach for the dish now gently placed in front of you. A shallow bowl with thin slices of ayu, sweet fish, poached just long enough to make the flesh melt without losing its silvery shimmer. It's garnished with a twist of yuzu peel and a curl of pickled ginger. A wooden spoon rests beside it like a sleepy cat's tail. You taste, and suddenly, every laugh and lute note from earlier feels like background noise. This bite is the main act. But of course, the food wasn't just sustenance, it was performance. Tea house chefs, especially those who worked the river circuit, became culinary showmen. They knew which dishes made patrons sigh, which sauces sparked conversation, which textures made poets fumble for metaphors. You hear a sizzle now. Across the water, another boat fires up its brazier. There's a hissing pop followed by a round of applause. Probably a grilled squid, freshly basted in soy and mirin, flipped with dramatic flair. Some boat kitchens even hired part-time street vendors known for flair, men who could juggle chopsticks or fan coals with the precision of a puppeteer. Quirky tidbit time. There was a brief Edo trend where floating tea houses competed by inventing their own pickled daikon recipes. Guests would vote, informally of course, on texture, spice and presentation. The most famous boat, Crane on the Water, allegedly had over 40 variations. One included tiny flecks of gold leaf. Totally impractical, completely iconic. You sip the broth. It tastes faintly of Dacian memory. There's something else too. A charred edge, like the ghost of a fire clinging to the surface. Your host notices your expression and smiles. Willow smoke in the brazier, she says softly, gives it a melancholy flavour. You nod. It does. Historians still argue whether floating tea house cuisine influenced Edo street food or the other way around. Some believe dishes like oden and kushiyaki, skewered meats and vegetables, became popular in the city only after travellers tasted them on the river. Others argue these were commoners' foods that simply found a floating upgrade, less grease, more poetry. But one thing's certain, the boats made food emotional, tied it to weather, to music, to moonlight and memory. You lean back as another tray arrives. This time it's dessert, chilled agar jelly with crushed plum and a single cherry suspended like a tiny lantern inside. A little sweet, a little sour. It jiggles with every rock of the boat as if it too knows it's dancing. And because the Edoites never missed a chance to joke about their meals, here's tonight's sleepy zinger. A fish on land is a tragedy. A fish in soup is a promotion. You chuckle into your sleeve as your boat sways again, slowly now, lazily, caught in the gentle tug of a shifting current. The brazier dims slightly, its embers pulsing like a sleepy heartbeat. You glance outside. A nearby boat drifts by with a large calligraphy banner fluttering on the stern. It reads simply, "We do not serve cold rice." You're not sure if that's a promise or a threat, but either way, you respect the conviction. Back inside, the scent of roasted rice and steam mixes with pine resin from the planks beneath you. You exhale deeply. This moment, quiet, full-bellied, drowsy, feels like a sigh turned into a room. And yet the rhythm of food continues. Somewhere behind the partition, your host and the cook are quietly cleaning. You hear the soft clink of bowls, the whisk of water across a wooden ladle, the folding of cloth. No chaos. Just method, reverence even, as if the meal, now done, still deserves ceremony. And maybe it does, because tonight the boat wasn't just a place. It was a kitchen, a stage, a lantern, a lullaby. All at once, you nestle deeper into your cushion, the last traces of sweetness lingering on your tongue. The boat rocks, and your thoughts drift, carried by the scent of soy and cedar toward the quiet centre of the night. The air is shifting again. Heavier now, not with heat, but with the expectant hush that comes before celebration. Your host has changed into a robe stitched with a subtle pattern of fireworks and waves. You didn't notice it earlier, but now it catches the flicker of a lantern just so, and you realise tonight is festival night. You lean over the side of the boat and there's movement everywhere. More boats pulling away from docks, larger vessels covered in paper lanterns in shades of saffron, vermilion, and pale blue. Some sway with laughing passengers, others host quiet parties, dignified and hushed, but no less deliberate in their revelry. The river is becoming a stage again, but this time you're not watching from a distance. You're part of the choreography. Mainstream fact, Edo's river festivals were some of the most anticipated events of the calendar year. blending Shinto traditions, seasonal rites, and a generous helping of communal joy. The Sumida River especially played host to dozens of events, from the massive Sumidagawa fireworks festival to more intimate moon-viewing flotillas and floating shrine processions during Obon. But the real charm, festivals experienced by boat. Floating tea houses would reserve their most elaborate vessels for these nights, outfitting them with bright fabrics, calligraphy panels, and even musicians who doubled as deckhands when needed. Tonight's event seems to be a tsukumi, or moon-viewing festival. You tilt your head back, and there it is, round and enormous, rising above the black tile rooftops of Edo like a slow exhale. It casts a pale glow on the river, shimmering and pulling the boats into a strange harmony, like koi in a perfect circle. One boat ahead releases a cluster of tiny lanterns shaped like rabbits, a nod to the Japanese myth that a rabbit lives on the moon, pounding rice cakes for eternity. You smile. A kid on your boat squeals in delight and tries to clap with his sleeves still over his hands. It doesn't go well. Your boatman rows with deliberate, graceful strokes, keeping your tea house drifting slowly, never spinning too fast, always at the perfect angle for viewing the moon. It's a practiced skill, like steering through liquid etiquette. From a nearby vessel, the soft sound of bamboo flutes begins. No applause, no stage lights, just music, drifting across the water like silk. Then comes the first poem. A guest on another boat recites it, clear, slow, and probably tipsy. The moon does not stir, yet all the boats beneath it cannot stay still. A ripple of polite laughter. Not bad, honestly. Someone else counters with a more comedic one involving dumplings and romantic regret. Another round of laughter. Historians still argue whether these river-based poetry battles were spontaneous or carefully pre-arranged by hosts looking to show off their connections. Either way, they served as icebreakers, ego boosts, and in rare cases, marriage proposals. Though historians are very unclear on the success rate of haiku-based engagements. You sip a fresh cup of amazake, warm and thick, almost like a drinkable pudding. It's sweet, comforting, and just alcoholic enough to explain why that guy across from you is now holding his fan like a lute and crooning about fireflies. Quirky tidbit of the night. During larger festivals, some floating tea houses employed distraction artists, people whose only job was to entertain the guests between actual performances. These might be mimicry acts, silent dancers, or even coordinated beetle races on tiny lacquered tracks set up in the corner. Yes, beetle races, with betting and tiny flags. You feel your boat shift as it joins a slow circular drift with three others, moving in a lazy spiral near the centre of the river. Overhead, paper lanterns strung between boats rock gently in the breeze, forming a soft canopy of light that stretches just far enough to seem magical, not mechanical. This is the heart of Edo's floating world. Not the tea houses themselves, but the moments they create. Moments when the sky turns silver, when strangers recite verses, when someone lights a sparkler just to see how quickly it vanishes. Impermanence made joyful. Your host sets a plate in front of you, fresh grilled rice cakes topped with sweet red bean paste. Another guest raises a cup and toasts the moon. You nod and raise yours too. It feels right somehow to acknowledge something so constant. And here's tonight's sleepy laugh. If the moon had ears, it would have gone deaf from all these poems centuries ago. You bite into your rice cake. It's warm and chewy, the kind of taste that doesn't demand attention but rewards it. Around you, laughter blends with the gentle splash of oars, the whisper of wind, and the rustle of someone scribbling down another haiku before they forget it. You close your eyes briefly and feel the boat turn again, slowly, like it's tracing the rim of a bowl. The music continues, softer now. The moon sits heavy in the sky, watching, indifferent but kind. And down here you float among words, music and roasted snacks. The boats circle, the river remembers, and the festival, like all good things, drifts onward. By morning the moon is gone and the sun rises slowly over the rooftops of Edo, an unhurried gold warming the wooden beams of bridges, the tiled edges of roofs, and the water surface with soft glints of heat. Your boat bobs quietly now, anchored near a shallow stretch of river, where reeds whisper in a breeze that smells faintly of charcoal and wet timber. The party's over, or is it? A strange stillness has taken hold. Your host is wrapped in a heavier robe now, sipping tea as she folds away the cushions and tucks incense back into its cedar box. You stretch, feeling the ache of a night well spent, the kind that lingers in your shoulders and makes you question whether the whole thing was real or just a very poetic dream. But wait, something's wrong. You look out at the river, and it's not moving. Not in the usual way anyway. The surface is too stiff, still but with a glimmer too crisp to be liquid. You blink, ice, thin sheets of it, stretching from bank to bank like the river has pulled on a winter coat made of glass. It creaked while you slept, you realise. The little cracks and pops you heard during the night weren't the boat settling, but the river freezing. And now here you are, adrift on a frozen stage. Mainstream fact, the Edo River system, particularly in harsh winters, occasionally froze over. Not every year. But when it happened, it turned the city's watery highways into curious, cracking boulevards of possibility. Fishermen adapted, merchants swore in frustration, and children, of course, rejoiced. So what did the floating tea houses do? Well, some closed. No sense risking a hull split open by a sneaky ice flow. Others leaned into the absurdity. Your boat host smiles softly as she steps outside onto the deck, broom in hand. Not to sweep leaves, there are none. She brushes snow off the roof, carefully as if she's done it 100 times before. She probably has. You hear laughter in the distance. A child slides across the ice in sandals, yelping with glee. Behind him, 2 other boats sit wedged in the frozen canal, their owners bundled up and sipping soup, grumbling about delayed schedules, but with that subtle Edo shrug that says, well, what can you do? And then there are those boats, the odd ones. You peer upriver and spot a narrow, flat-bottomed skiff with a brazier bolted to its deck and a man dangling a fishing line through a carved hole in the ice. Yes, ice fishing from a tea house. Why not? If the river won't carry you, use it as a table. Quirky tidbit? There's a record from the late 1700s of a floating tea house that converted into a winter sauna boat during a particularly long freeze. Guests would huddle inside around hot stones while staff boiled river water for steam. It became wildly popular until someone fell asleep too close to the coals and singed half a kimono. Business dipped briefly after that. You rub your hands together for warmth. Your host has placed a heated tile beneath your cushion. Thoughtful and very necessary. The air inside the boat is fragrant with cedar and steamed rice again. Breakfast is being prepared. Porridge this time, thick with barley and dotted with pickled plum. The steam rises in lazy curls, misting the window panes just enough to make the world look like it's still dreaming. Historians still argue whether these cold weather adaptations were purely practical or part of the river culture's charm offensive. Some say it was desperation, that without movement the boats had no choice but to reinvent themselves. Others claim the novelty was the point. The Edoats, especially the well-to-do, loved a good seasonal stunt. You take a bite of porridge. It's hot, slightly salty, grounding. Outside, someone slips on the ice and lands flat with a muffled thud. Nobody laughs, at least not loudly. You and your host exchange a glance. The shared amusement needs no words. The river, even frozen, remains a performer, a mood with frostbite. And here's your sleepy joke for today. Only in Edo can a boat be late because the road froze under it. You grin and shift closer to the brazier. Your host pours you a bowl of amazake, just warm enough to bring your fingers back to life. Another boat passes, slowly scraping over the thinner ice near the centre of the channel, guided carefully by a long pole used more like an ice pick than an oar. On board are 2 elderly women wrapped in layers, playing Go and not seeming to notice, or care, about the frigid conditions. This, you realise, is part of the magic. The tea houses weren't just adaptable, they were stubborn, anchored not in water, but in presence. If they couldn't float, they'd freeze with dignity. If they couldn't glide, they'd find a way to glimmer. And the guests, they showed up, shivering, slipping, slurping hot miso, but showing up. Because for all its absurdity, there was poetry in this too. The winter tea house is quieter. No musicians tonight, no poets reciting verses to the moon. But there's a different kind of intimacy. A smaller, tighter warmth shared by those who choose to show up, even when the river refuses to cooperate. You glance at the teacup in your hands, noticing a tiny crack in the glaze, a reminder that even the finest ceramics can wear with time and use. It doesn't make it any less beautiful. Outside, the ice creaks again. The sun is higher now, and somewhere, maybe later this afternoon, it will begin to melt. The river will resume its slow choreography, but for now you sit in a still, floating world that doesn't need to move to matter. The ice has started to melt, not all at once, just here and there, thin cracks winding like lazy brushstrokes across the river's surface, spreading beneath the sunlight like secrets waking from a nap. You hear them before you see them, tiny snaps, the occasional muffled splash, and somewhere, a wooden oar testing the water like a sleepy cat pawing at a puddle. And with the thaw comes a whisper, not from the wind, not from the boatmen, but from the stories that cling to these waters like mist, ghosts, spirits, and things that drift without oars. You pull your cloak a little tighter, more from atmosphere than chill, because tonight, or whatever time it is in this dream, you're learning that the Sumida River doesn't just carry boats and poems, it carries memory. And sometimes, memory gets weird. Mainstream fact, Edo, like many cities built along water, had a deep spiritual relationship with its rivers. Flowing water was seen as both a cleanser and a boundary, between this world and the next. While shrines lined the banks to bless the living, there were also rituals to appease the dead, especially those who had perished by drowning or misfortune. Naturally, the floating teahouses were caught in this in-between. After all, what better setting for a ghost story than a gently swaying boat, half lit by lanterns surrounded by black water and reed shadows? You sip from your tea. The thought makes it taste just a touch colder. Your host doesn't mention anything, but she lights a bit of incense and places it on the rail beside you. For the smell? Perhaps. But there's an old Edo superstition. Sandalwood smoke keeps river spirits disoriented. They drift toward the scent and forget why they were haunting you in the first place. You smile at that. Comforting, in a strange way. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many floating tea houses kept a secret spirit cup, a tiny, cracked porcelain vessel that was never washed, never used by guests, and never removed from its hiding place. It was left out on full moons with a drop of sake, just in case someone, or something, wanted to join in peaceably. Better to have a polite ghost than a sulky one. Stories. Oh, there were plenty. Like the tale of the boat that circled the same bridge 3 times on a windless night, even though the rower swore he wasn't moving. Or the woman in white who appeared on the deck of a closed boat, humming a lullaby no one remembered teaching her. Or the guest who ordered tea, drank half, and vanished before the bill was delivered, leaving behind a comb made from bone. Historians still argue whether these ghost stories were invented by boatmen to entertain, or to discourage drunken guests from getting too bold. "Watch your step," they'd whisper with a grin. "The river remembers everyone who's fallen in." You feel the boat rock just slightly now, though no one's moved. It's probably nothing. The shamisen player on a nearby boat begins a slow minor tune. Something old, something dissonant. You can't quite place it, but it catches the edge of your mind like the corner of a dream you've had before. Your host clears her throat, interrupting your thoughts. "There's a shrine," she says softly, "just upriver, for the drowned." You nod. You've seen the little stone statues tucked along embankments, many dressed with red bibs or tied with prayer cords. Offerings left on wet mornings, oranges, tiny sack cups, handwritten poems folded like letters. The people of Edo believed strongly in ritual, especially when it came to water. To not offer respect was to invite mischief, or worse, misfortune. You peer over the side of the boat. The water is darker now, but not empty. Leaves drift past. Maybe a piece of paper. Could be litter. Could be a floating charm sent downstream. Some festivals involve sending prayers in boats made of straw and paper. Some say, if you send your worry away, the river will carry it off for good. And yet, sometimes things come back. You smile. Not nervously, but fondly. Because if Edo's floating tea houses taught you anything, it's that beauty and eeriness often arrive in the same robe. Tonight's sleepy joke? "The river's haunted," one old boatman once said, "but only by those who still want dessert." You raise your cup again, half wondering if you should offer a drop to the spirit cup hidden somewhere behind you, just in case. The wind picks up slightly. You catch a whiff of incense, soy, and something fainter, maybe old sandalwood, maybe old stories. The floating world, ukiyo, was never meant to be all laughter and lanterns. It included shadows. It included the past. And the boats? They floated on both. You sit still, letting the music from the other boat drift into your thoughts, the tune now folding into silence. Somewhere, a bell rings, a small shrine bell maybe, or maybe someone just dropped a serving spoon. Either way, you're warm, safe, and just a little haunted. Which, in Edo, means you're exactly where you should be. The water is awake again, not fully, not rushing or churning, but moving, as if shaking off a long dream. Thin sheets of ice have broken into drifting puzzle pieces. Lanterns bob gently in their cages. The oars creak as your boatman begins rowing once more, slow and sure, like someone starting a familiar lullaby from the first note. But tonight, there's tension in the stillness. Not fear, not even excitement, just awareness. You glance toward the front of the boat where a pair of figures in dark robes sit cross-legged, heads bowed. They don't speak, they don't drink. One of them holds a paper fan folded shut, the other has a ledger tucked beside his cushion. These aren't musicians, they're not guests, they're officials. And suddenly you remember, not everyone comes to floating tea houses for music or food or starlight. Some come for privacy, for business that doesn't fit comfortably on land. Mainstream fact. Despite their reputation for entertainment, floating tea houses were also hubs for quiet negotiation. The river offered what walls could not: distance. And in the heavily surveilled social structure of Edo Japan, discretion was a luxury. That made the boats perfect for unofficial meetings, whispered arrangements, and even covert deals. Your host seems a little stiffer tonight. She moves gracefully as ever, but you catch the subtle tension in her steps, the way she folds the tablecloth a little too neatly. The brazier has been extinguished. No sake, no music, just tea and space. Historians still argue whether the shogunate tolerated these meetings or simply pretended not to notice. There's evidence of wandering scribes operating from boats, offering calligraphy, contracts, or coded correspondence. Some brokers kept backup ledgers written in metaphor, entries like "a plum and a turtle beneath winter moonlight," that meant anything from trade routes to blackmail payments. Your quirky tidbit? One floating tea house reportedly installed a false bottom in the main deck, just large enough for one crouching person. It was said to be used for hiding lovers, fugitives, or secret messages, depending on the night. They called it the second tide. You peer toward the other end of the boat. The officials haven't moved. One adjusts his fan, still unopened. It's not hot. That fan isn't for fanning, it's for showing rank, or perhaps for signalling. One flick to close a deal, another to dismiss a topic. Edo was a city where body language had its own grammar, and the water amplified everything. A spoken word carried. A shuffle of sandals echoed, which is why not speaking spoke volumes. Silence on a boat was louder than conversation. You lean back and let the moment breathe. You're not meant to intrude, just to observe. The officials murmur something, low and rhythmic like monks reciting legal terms. You sip your tea, trying to read between syllables. Some boats even trained their staff in lip reading, you've heard. Not to gossip, officially, but to prepare tea refills at the exact right pause. Of course, it probably didn't hurt when the hostess knew who owed whom a favour. The boatman keeps his eyes fixed on the water ahead. No detours, no glances, just the steady splash of the oar. You hear the call of a night heron in the distance, oddly well timed. A crow answers from the bank. These little sounds form a kind of nature's eavesdropping, and now, unexpectedly, one of the officials chuckles, soft, brief. The tension breaks like a dropped noodle. Your host relaxes ever so slightly. She pours a second round of tea. You can't hear the words, but you can feel the shape of the agreement settling into place. Something just happened. A deal? A delay? A quiet surrender? Doesn't matter. The river holds the secret now. Here's your joke of the night. A wise man signs no contract before the tea is cold, and never while the boat still rocks. You smile to yourself. The tea is warm, the boat is steady. You're safe. After a few more minutes, the officials rise, bow to each other, bow to your host, and step lightly onto a smaller craft tethered to yours. It pulls away without ceremony, slipping into the mist like a thought forgotten before it could turn into speech. You exhale. The silence they leave behind feels cleaner somehow, less crowded. Your host places a tiny incense burner beside you again. She doesn't say why. She doesn't need to. You both understand that here even air needs a reset after certain conversations. And you wonder, how many decisions were made out here on the river? How many policies, marriages, betrayals, or truces began on a cushion, over tea, beneath stars? Probably more than the official records suggest. The floating tea house wasn't just an escape, it was a stage for all kinds of dramas, some quiet, some invisible, some still echoing through Tokyo's alleys, long after the last oar was hung up. The river is darker now, but not threatening, just private, gentle, like a confidant who doesn't gossip. You sip your tea again. No fan flicks, no riddles, just warmth and the slow return of a world that moments ago had gone completely still. The night stretches on, velvet and uninterrupted, but the river beneath you feels more alive than ever. Not loud, not rushed, just humming with memory. Like every ripple carries a fragment of song, a whispered rumour, or a half-finished sketch someone forgot to sign. And it's no accident you feel that way. Because as the floating tea houses grew in popularity, they didn't just entertain, they inspired. They seeped into the brushstrokes of painters, the syllables of poets, and the gossip-laced woodcuts sold at busy morning markets. Tonight, you pass by a larger boat, longer, with a low sloping roof and paper panels along its sides. Inside, the soft glow of lanterns reveals figures in hunched concentration. Artists. You catch glimpses of ink brushes, ink stones, and wooden boards being carved with delicate precision. It's a floating atelier. Mainstream fact, the floating tea houses of Edo weren't just subjects of entertainment, they became obsessions for artists and writers. Ukiyo-e artists like Utagawa Hiroshige and Kitagawa Utamaro produced dozens of prints showing moonlit river scenes, secret rendezvous aboard boats, and soft glowing interiors full of music, tea, and emotion. Some images were romantic, others cheeky, and some scandalous enough to need hiding under your tatami mat when guests came over. You peer closer at one artist now, brush hovering above a narrow sheet of paper. He's drawing a courtesan holding a shamisen, but her face isn't finished. He keeps glancing across the room, probably at the real-life inspiration, who's currently yawning between performances. She catches his look and rolls her eyes playfully. Art imitating life, imitating flirtation. You pass by another boat, this one quieter. Inside, a poet is reciting aloud to no one in particular, just letting the lines take shape in the dark. River forgets nothing. Even the cup I dropped once still waits for my hand. The boatman nods, either out of appreciation or because he's heard that poem 20 times already. You'd guess the latter. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some floating tea houses developed reputations not just for their food or music, but for the quality of art gossip. Want to know which playwright was secretly dating a fan painter? Or who plagiarized a haiku? Visit the right boat at the right hour and the truth would arrive with your rice cakes. Artists also loved the boats because they offered unique lighting. Paper lanterns and moonlight cast soft rounded shadows that blurred outlines and made everything look just a little more poetic. It's no wonder they'd sketch entire river scenes from memory later, using only brush, ink and regret for what they didn't sketch in time. Historians still argue whether floating tea houses truly shaped the ukiyo-e style, or whether they were simply a popular backdrop. But there's little doubt that some of Edo's most famous prints owe their mood, their mist and their mischief to these gently swaying stages. Even the calligraphy on festival banners sometimes originated aboard boats. Drunk poets, encouraged by sake and warm tofu, would scrawl down lines that later became rallying cries or punchlines. One legendary haiku, famously published in a broadsheet, was allegedly composed in the middle of a soy sauce accident involving a slippery tray and a broken sandal. You're not sure if that's true, but you hope it is. Your host returns now with a thin scroll, unrolled just far enough to show a brush painting of a single firefly hovering over the water. Below it, a line of poetry in sleepy, curving kanji. She places it beside your cushion. A gift? A reminder? A souvenir from the night you're still inside? You don't ask. And here's your joke of the evening. Art is like sake, better when shared, more honest when spilled. You smile, lifting the scroll for a better look. The firefly's light is just a dab of yellow ink, but it glows somehow. Or maybe your eyes are just tired, or dreaming. More boats pass, some full of performers sketching costume designs, others filled with would-be novelists writing florid descriptions of their own reflections in the river. One boat advertises love poems by the hour, and you don't even want to know how that pricing works. But this part of the night is softer, It doesn't demand attention like a fireworks show or command silence like a political meeting. It simply exists. It drifts. It watches you watching it, then keeps floating. You lie back again, scroll in your lap, and trace the curve of a painted line with your finger. How many artists sat in this exact pose? How many poems were started and never finished? Songs hummed once and then lost to the night wind. And yet, somehow, you feel them all around you. Not haunting, just lingering. Like ink that never fully dried. The boat rocks. Your host dims one of the lanterns. The poet on the next boat pauses mid-verse to sip tea. You feel less like a guest and more like a sketch. Light, deliberate, drifting between pages. Your boat glides quietly beneath a narrow wooden bridge now, its underside stained by centuries of rain and rice wine spills. The planks above creak softly under someone's distant footsteps. But your attention is elsewhere, drawn to the murmur of the water below and the gentle tension of your boatman's shoulders as he adjusts the oar. The floating tea house continues to drift. Graceful, yes, but a little slower now, a little heavier. There's a scent in the air that doesn't belong. Damp wood, sure. River algae, naturally, but beneath that, smoke. The kind that clings to memories, not meals. Because even floating beauty isn't immune to calamity. Mainstream fact. Edo suffered frequent fires, floods, and even earthquakes. Nicknamed the City of Fire, it experienced hundreds of blazes over the centuries, some of them large enough to wipe out entire districts. But curiously, floating tea houses, those delicate, bobbing, paper-walled places, often survived. Not because they were invincible, but because they moved. You glance toward the shoreline, where charred beams from an old dock lie half buried in the mud. Moss grows through them now, softening the damage. But your host nods toward them briefly. "Third fire in 20 years, she says almost too casually. "We floated through it." Your boat creaks again, but not from damage, just age, a familiar lived-in creak. There's a pride here, quiet but undeniable. Because while stone buildings cracked and markets drowned, the boats adjusted, pulled anchor, changed routes, waited it out. Historians still argue whether floating tea houses were rebuilt more frequently than their land-based counterparts or simply better at dodging danger. Some records suggest that in the wake of major disasters, they were among the first businesses to reopen, offering comfort food, calming music, and the reassuring knowledge that some traditions still floated. And yes, there were losses. Stories tell of floating tea houses swept away by floods, their lanterns found miles downstream days later, still flickering. There's even a recorded case of a tea house that survived a typhoon by anchoring itself to 3 separate bridges and simply riding it out like a very stubborn leaf. Your quirky tidbit. One particularly famous boat, nicknamed the Lucky Dragon, survived a total of 6 floods and 4 fires. The owner claimed it was due to an offering he made every year to the river, an ink drawing of a carp made by his blind grandmother. He hung it under the floorboards, and every time the water rose, the boat somehow stayed safe. Whether superstition or coincidence, the story made him very popular, and probably helped with tips. You sip your tea, noticing that tonight it's stronger, darker roast, almost smoky. A quiet homage maybe, a liquid reminder. The city lights on the shore flicker against the river, but you notice gaps, sections where buildings once stood are now only outlines. One former dock is now a garden, and a floating stall has taken its place nearby, selling grilled rice balls and dried persimmons to passing boats. The resilience of it all feels personal. Every plank on your boat has likely been replaced at some point, every cushion resewn, every dish reglazed, and yet it still feels old, not in a crumbling way, in a respectful one. Your host pulls back a panel to show you a small wooden charm hanging near the helm. It's weathered smooth by time and fingers, paint long faded, writing nearly illegible. She shrugs. "First owner made it," she says. "We keep it, just in case." You run your fingers over the charm. It's warm, like it's holding on to more than just the heat from her hand. Maybe it's holding memories of laughter, of smoke, of survival. And here's your soft joke for tonight. Edo boats don't sink. They just find new places to float. You grin, thinking of all the clever repairs and spontaneous reroutes it must have taken to keep these traditions alive. From across the water, you hear the thunk of a hammer. A man on a repair raft is reattaching a plank to the side of a newly restored tea house. He hums as he works, balanced on one foot, sandals tied with fraying twine. The hammering doesn't disturb the piece, it just fits, like punctuation in a lullaby. Your boat continues downstream, passing a section of riverbank where reeds have overtaken what once was a dock. Tiny frogs leap between the stalks, and in the distance a new platform is being built. Already, 2 women are measuring the angles for a future performance stage. The cycle continues. You glance up, a few stars poke through the clouds again, shy but present, and beneath them, the boats keep floating. Changed, repaired, resilient. The river doesn't forget, it just forgives, gently. You exhale and let your hand skim the surface of the water. It's cool again, but no longer sharp with ice, just smooth, steady. Your host hums a song now, old, slow, slightly off-key. You recognise the melody from a print you saw once. An artist's depiction of a flooded street with one boat floating serenely through it, 2 geisha inside playing shamisen above the chaos. Stylized, yes, but true in spirit. Because the floating tea houses didn't just endure disasters, they outlasted them, and tonight, so do you. The river narrows now, funneling between newly built stone embankments and carefully placed docks that feel different, cleaner, more structured. You pass beneath an iron bridge, not wooden like the old ones, but a modern span of bolts and beams that hums faintly as carts roll overhead. The boats are fewer now. The air smells less of grilled eel and more of coal smoke. The sky, no longer painted in the soft, warm haze of oil lamps, glows with pale electric light that flattens everything into black and white silhouettes. The golden days of the floating tea houses are behind you now. You've entered the edge of the Meiji era, and the world is changing. Mainstream fact: when the Tokugawa shogunate fell in 1868 and the Meiji Restoration began, everything changed, rapidly. Japan opened to the west, railways were built, gaslights replaced paper lanterns, and Edo itself was renamed Tokyo. Modernization was the law of the land, and suddenly, things that once floated through the cracks were being regulated, paved over or forgotten. The floating tea houses were not exempt. Many tried to adapt. Some replaced their paper screens with glass windows. Some fitted their boats with steam-powered paddle wheels. Others just changed their names, registered with the new authorities, and hoped that tea house didn't sound too scandalous anymore. But the charm, the mystery, the weightless, half-illegal poetry of it all, that began to fade. Your host, older now, maybe the daughter of the woman who served you tea years ago, watches silently as a row of buildings along the canal flicker to life with electric bulbs. They shine too bright. No shadows, no romance. Just the sterile glow of modernity doing its best to overwrite the night. Historians still argue whether the Meiji reforms improved life or erased too much. Floating tea houses were seen by some as old-fashioned, indulgent, or even immoral, a relic of a pleasure-seeking past that had no place in Japan's future. Licenses were harder to obtain, inspections increased, some boats were forced to anchor permanently, no longer allowed to drift freely. A few chose to retire quietly, others refused. Your quirky tidbit? One stubborn boat owner in the 1880s attached fake steam pipes to his vessel to make it look modern without changing a thing inside. Guests entered past a whistling teapot disguised as a boiler and found the same tatami mats, pickled daikon, and off-tune shamisen music waiting. The inspectors were never quite sure what to do with him. You smile. Even now, even with change pressing in from every bank, the river refuses to give up all its secrets. You glance around. 1 or 2 traditional boats still float, their lanterns dimmer, their sails patched, but real. The guests inside, tourists maybe, or true believers. One has a small painting propped on their lap, another holds a half-finished poem. The spirit's still there, thinner, fainter, but it hasn't vanished completely. And here's your sleepy joke. The steamships were faster, sure, but did they ever bring you grilled eel and a marriage proposal at the same time? Didn't think so. You chuckle into your sleeve. The boat rocks gently. The riverbanks are straighter now, less wild. Stone walls keep it from flooding. Fences keep you from wandering. But the water still moves like it remembers the curves. The floating tea houses of Edo didn't disappear overnight. They drifted out slowly like candlelight in wind. Some became restaurants on land, their names preserved in glowing signs. Others became tourist attractions, A few. They just untied their ropes one last time and let the river take them wherever it still could. Your host places a small photograph beside your tea, sepia-toned, grainy. It shows a boat from long ago, docked beside a weeping willow, its lantern glowing like a full moon. On the deck, a woman smiles faintly toward the camera, unfamiliar and familiar all at once. Her name was Kiku, the host says softly. She ran the last true floating tea house, closed it when she was 75, said the water was too quiet after all the others left. You nod and sip. Quiet isn't bad, just different. You look ahead now. Your boat turns once more, drifting past the last patch of open water before the stone canal walls rise on both sides. The modern city looms, electric and efficient. But behind you is the river that used to breathe in poetry, spit out rumours, rock 100 hearts to sleep under a cherry blossom moon. And even if no one else remembers, it remembers itself. You press your hand to the side of the boat, the planks smooth and cool. Someone carved a name there long ago. It's faded now, but you can almost make it out. A boat's name, a woman's, a poem, or maybe all three. The floating tea houses are fading now, like dreams just before waking. But some things, some moods, some silences, some glows, they don't need buildings or brochures. They just need one quiet, drifting moment, and someone to remember. The city has changed its clothes again. Gone are the robed merchants with clinking coin purses, and the gently swaying lanterns that once turned rivers into ribbons of flame. Now there are taxis along the bridges, neon signs instead of paper banners, and vending machines where tea house boys once handed out pickled plums with a bow. You step off a modern walkway and wander toward the water's edge. But your eyes are trained not on the skyline, but on the echoes. They're still here. You don't see a floating tea house, not exactly. But something catches your eye. A narrow wooden dock tucked behind a row of restaurants. It's old, older than anything around it. Its beams are worn smooth, not by shoes but by ropes, the kind that used to tether dreams with sails. Mainstream fact, today Tokyo still has ukiyo-bune, modern pleasure boats that recreate, in part, the floating tea house experience. They're longer, sturdier, outfitted with karaoke machines and air conditioning. But the soul is there, faintly, especially on summer nights, when paper lanterns return for festivals and the food leans traditional. You walk down to the edge of one now. It's painted red and black, clean and clearly maintained, but the design hasn't changed much in centuries. Inside you spot tatami mats, low tables, even a lacquered tray of grilled unagi. Tourists laugh from the cabin, sipping beer. Outside, a staff member ties a rope with practiced hands. It's modern, it's polished, but you feel it. The bones are familiar. A younger you might scoff. It's commercialized now, commodified. But the river doesn't care. It just carries on, happy to be useful, happy to offer a place to float. You smile and step back. Your shoes crunch against old gravel where grass pushes through the cracks. A woman walks past with a child holding a paper fan, patterned with a pale rabbit and a full moon. A replica maybe, but lovely. Historians still argue whether these modern riverboats preserve the original spirit or just mimic it. Some argue that without the mischief, without the legal grey areas and whispered poetry, the floating tea house has lost its magic. Others believe every echo is a kind of survival, that even karaoke over tatami is better than forgetting. You pass under a bridge and see another trace, an old iron ring embedded in stone, a mooring point. No sign explains it, no plaque, just a loop of metal, half swallowed by moss and time. You crouch beside it, run your fingers over it. Someone once tied a rope here. Someone once rowed their guests upriver to the sound of shamisen, docked just long enough to refill sake cups and share a poem about chrysanthemums. And now it's just you, and a ring, and a feeling. Here's your quirky tidbit. In one quiet corner of Asakusa, an elderly woman runs a tea shop that used to be the dockside kitchen for a floating tea house. She still uses the original clay pot to simmer her broth. Tourists love her. Locals love her more. She tells everyone the secret to her soup is river stories. You'd believe her. You walk further down a row of cherry trees that haven't bloomed yet, but the branches still hang like curtains over the canal, casting that familiar silhouette. Twisted trunks, delicate branches, just enough shade to imagine you're someone else, somewhere else. Someone leans over a railing nearby, sketching. You glimpse the rough lines of a boat, a woman seated on its edge, a shamisen cradled in her lap. The artist doesn't look up. Maybe they're just imagining, or maybe they saw something you didn't. And here's your joke. Gentle, this time, maybe a little sad. Floating tea houses didn't disappear. They just stopped bothering with permission slips. You smile, maybe that's true. You stand now at the edge of a shallow inlet where the water gathers gently behind a curve in the walkway. Something drifts toward you, just a scrap of paper, soggy and torn. But there's writing on it, on kanji, barely legible. You think it might be a poem, or a menu, or a wish. You let it pass, because that's what this river asks of you, not to hold on to it, but to let it move through you, like steam, like a song, like the heat of grilled tofu on a winter night. The floating tea houses of Edo are gone, and also still here. Not in the way they were, not with secret spirit cups or coded fans or beetle races on lacquer trays, but in the hush that falls just after a fireworks show when the crowd quiets for one last spark. In the curve of a wooden oar on display in a museum, labelled Unknown Owner. In the silence between poems that no one remembers writing, but someone still recites. You press your hand to the railing. The wood is new, but the water is old, and it remembers. The sun is gone again. The city behind you hums with traffic and the glow of convenience stores, but here, by the slow bend of the river, it's night, and not just in the sky. Night in the air, in the pace, in the hush. You board one final boat. This one is smaller. No nameplate, no banners, just polished wood, a paper lantern with a flickering flame, and a few cushions already warmed by someone who thought you'd be coming. There's no host now, no shamisen player, no trays of rice cakes, no tea to pour, just you, and the boat, and the drift. Because this part, this final stretch, belongs to you alone. The oarsman says nothing as he pushes you gently from the shore. You nod in thanks. He nods in return. No fanfare, no farewell. The river resumes its rhythm, soft and unhurried. Tonight's not about history, not about meals or musicians or moon-viewing metaphors. Tonight's about remembering what it means to float. You lean back, gaze tilted to the heavens. The stars are fewer now, veiled behind modern haze, but they're still there, still blinking, still quiet. And just like that, the floating tea houses begin to return, not in form, but in feeling. You see them in the curve of a passing shadow, in the way the water sloshes against the hull like an old friend clearing its throat before telling a story. You feel them in the silence, the welcome kind, the kind that doesn't rush to fill itself. Mainstream fact, nothing about Edo lasted forever. The city changed names, the river changed course. Even the most enduring boats were eventually dismantled or repurposed, or pulled onto land to dry and crack in the sun. But the ukiyo, the floating world, was never about permanence, it was about presence. You feel it now, that presence, that careful attention to the moment that says, this is it, not yesterday, not tomorrow, just this soft breeze, this creaking wood, this slow and steady drift through water that knows your name, your quirky tidbit. Some boatmen used to claim that if you drifted long enough, in the right kind of quiet, the river would whisper answers to your questions. Not loudly, not directly. Just a phrase, or a scent, or a flash of something reflected. You're not sure you believe that. But tonight, you ask anyway. And while you wait, you listen. Listen to the way the water folds itself into the curve of the boat. Listen to the breeze stirring something you can't quite name. Listen to the memories layered over memories. Paper screens, laughter, smoke, poetry scribbled on the back of a receipt. And listen to the quiet. Because here's the truth. The floating tea houses were never about tea. They were never about performance. Not really. They were about pause, about stepping out of the grid, about letting go of the shore, about drifting gently until your thoughts stop clawing forward and start drifting sideways instead. You drift. The boat passes under a low bridge. Someone has tied a string of folded cranes to the underside. They rustle like dry leaves. One falls loose and lands in your lap. You don't unfold it. You just hold it. And here's your final sleepy joke, more lullaby than laughter. A boat ride is the only meeting where falling asleep is considered polite. You smile, eyes half closed, The city behind you still exists. The paper lanterns have dimmed. The stories have settled into the floorboards like dust. But the river carries you still. No need to paddle. No need to speak. Just breathe. Float. Sleep. The water has you now. Let everything slow now. The river no longer rushes. The lanterns no longer flicker. Even the stars seem to pause. Soft, hazy, barely blinking through the misted sky. The boat glides with almost no sound, like it's coasting through memory, not water. You shift slightly on the cushion, not to adjust, but simply to feel it. The gentle pressure of fabric, the worn smoothness of the planks beneath you, the cool hush of air pressing through an open panel. Every sound has softened. The splash of the oar is a whisper, the creak of wood, a sigh. There is no destination now. There is no route to follow. You've left the world behind, not permanently, just long enough. Long enough to let your shoulders drop, your breath deepen, your thoughts loosen their grip. You drift past a willow whose branches nearly touch the boat. One brush of green fingers across your shoulder and it's gone. The moment, like all the others, passes. That's the beauty of it. Nothing in the floating world stays, and that's why it matters. Somewhere far off, a flute plays one last note. Or maybe that's your mind, playing tricks, folding sound and memory into one. Either way, you're safe. The boat moves slowly now, maybe not at all. You close your eyes. The river keeps drifting. The night keeps deepening. And you, gentle traveller, have earned your rest. Good night. 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 Good night.